The ruins of Veyrath stretched across the barren planet, covered in layers of dust and time. Massive stone pillars, half buried in sand, stood like the bones of a long-dead civilization. Deep within these ruins, hidden from the eyes of the galaxy, lay something ancient, something waiting. Captain Elise Voss had seen many abandoned worlds before, but there was something different about this one. She stood at the edge of a broken staircase, her boots sinking slightly into the dusty ground. The air smelled stale, untouched for centuries. Her team moved carefully behind her. Dr. Jonas Cade, an archaeologist, adjusted his visor and studied the carvings on the walls. Sergeant Raina Carter, her second in command, kept her rifle ready, scanning for movement. Tech specialist Orin muttered to himself as he checked his scanner. "This place gives me a bad feeling," Orin said, his voice low. "That's because it's old," Jonas replied, running a hand over the strange symbols. Veyrath was one of the first great empires. Their queen ruled with power no one could explain. Elise glanced at the worn carvings. They showed a figure holding a long, curved blade, standing over kneeling enemies. The queen's blade. "I don't believe in myths," Elise said. Jonas gave her a small smile. "Maybe you should. Some legends are real." They moved deeper into the ruins, stepping carefully over fallen stones. The corridors were narrow, the air thick with silence. The only sounds were their footsteps and the occasional beep from Orin's scanner. Then, suddenly, boom! The ground shook, sending dust raining from above. Orin cursed, checking his scanner. That wasn't natural. Elise turned sharply. Movement. Raina pointed her rifle toward the entrance. "We're not alone." A voice echoed through the ruins, metallic and cold. "Secure the artifact. Kill the intruders." Dark figures appeared at the entrance, sovereignty enforcers. Their armor gleamed under the faint light, weapons raised. "Move," Elise shouted. The team dove for cover as the first shots fired. Energy bolts struck the walls, leaving deep burns. Raina returned fire, taking down one of the enforcers, but more were coming. "They were waiting for us," Orin yelled. Jonas ducked behind a pillar. They must know about the blade. Elisa's mind raced. They were trapped. The only way was forward, deeper into the ruins. "This way," she ordered, leading them through a narrow passage. The enforcers followed, their footsteps pounding behind them. The passage opened into a massive chamber. At its center, resting on an ancient stone pedestal, was the blade of Veyrath. It was unlike any weapon Elise had seen. The metal was black as midnight, its edges glowing faintly with a strange energy. Symbols ran along its surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. Jonas gasped. "It's real." "The lice, we need to go," Raina shouted. But something called to Elise. A whisper, soft yet powerful, echoed in her mind. The blade. It was speaking. She hesitated only a second. Then the enforcers entered the chamber. "Take the blade," one of them ordered. No time to think. Elise grabbed the hilt. The world exploded. A wave of energy surged through her body, burning and freezing at the same time. Visions flooded her mind, memories that were not her own. A queen standing atop a battlefield. A betrayal. A war lost. Rage, sorrow, power. Elise gasped, falling to one knee. The whispers in her mind grew louder, becoming a single voice. "You are worthy." The blade came alive in her hands. The enforcers moved to attack, but Elise moved faster. She didn't know how. Her body reacted on its own, guided by something ancient. She dodged the first shot, twisting with inhuman speed. The blade hummed as it cut through the air, through armor, through enemies. In seconds, it was over. The enforcers lay motionless. Raina stared at Elise, breathing hard. What was that? Elise stood slowly, the blade still humming in her grip. She looked at it, then at her team. The whispers in her mind had quieted, but one thing was clear. The blade had chosen her, and nothing would be the same again. Elise stood in the ancient chamber, gripping the blade of Arath. The hum of the weapon echoed in the silence. The enforcers lay defeated around her, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still spinning from what had just happened. The blade was more than just metal. It was alive. It had spoken to her, filling her with a power she did not understand. "Captain." Reyna's voice broke through the haze. Elise blinked and turned to her team. Reyna looked tense, her rifle still raised. Jonas, the archaeologist, stared at the blade with a mixture of awe and fear. Orin was already scanning it, his hands shaking slightly. "Elise, what did you do?" Jonas asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just picked it up." Jonas took a careful step forward. "The blade has been dormant for centuries. No one has been able to awaken it, but it reacted to you." Elise looked down at the weapon in her hand. It felt like it belonged there, like it had always been waiting for her. The whispers in her head were quieter now, but they were still there, like an old voice trying to be heard. "We need to leave," Orin said. His scanner beeped urgently. "The Sovereignty will send reinforcements. They won't let you keep that thing." Elise nodded. "Then let's move." The team ran back through the ruins, their boots kicking up dust. The battle had weakened the structure, and pieces of stone began to fall from the ceiling. The once silent corridors were now filled with warning sirens. The Sovereignty's ships were coming. As they neared the exit, a deep rumbling sound came from behind. The chamber where Elise had taken the blade collapsed, sealing it forever. Whatever secrets remained there were lost. But Elise had taken the most important piece with her. The chase begins. The moment they stepped outside, the sky roared with the sound of approaching ships. Dark Sovereignty fighters swept through the air, scanning for them. The team sprinted toward their ship, the Starfall, parked just beyond the ruins. "We won't make it in time," Orin said, breathing hard. Elise clenched the blade. She had no plan, just instinct. The whispers in her head grew louder, telling her what to do. She raised the blade. A pulse of energy burst outward, knocking back the nearest fighters. The ships wobbled, their pilots struggling for control. Jonas stumbled back. "Elise, you." "Not now," she shouted. "Get to the ship." The team rushed forward as gunfire rained down. Reyna covered them, taking precise shots at the soldiers on the ground. Elise ran beside her, the blade still glowing. Then, a massive warship appeared in the sky above. Orin cursed. "That's a Sovereignty Dread class. We're doomed." A cold, commanding voice crackled through their radios. "Elise Voss, you are carrying a forbidden artifact. Surrender immediately, or be destroyed." Elise gritted her teeth. Surrender. That wasn't an option. She reached the ship and leaped inside, the others right behind her. "Go, go, go," she shouted. Reyna jumped into the pilot's seat, and the Starfall roared to life. The engines flared, and the ship shot into the sky, dodging enemy fire. The Dread-class warship opened fire. Massive energy beams streaked past them, barely missing. Reyna twisted the controls, weaving through the chaos. "We won't outrun them," Orin yelled. Elise felt the whispers again. The Queen's voice was stronger now. "Fight." She didn't know what she was doing, but she trusted the blade. Elise stepped toward the ship's weapons control and placed the blade against the console. A shockwave of blue energy surged through the ship's systems. Suddenly, the weapons glowed brighter. The ship's engines burned hotter. Reyna's eyes widened. "What the hell did you do?" "Just shoot," Elise said. Reyna didn't hesitate. She fired the ship's cannons, and for the first time, a single shot took down an enemy warship. Orin nearly fell out of his chair. "What was that?" Jonas whispered. "The blade isn't just a weapon. It's power." Elise didn't answer. She felt it too. The blade wasn't just ancient metal. It was something more. Something alive. And now, it was part of her. A new threat. They finally escaped the planet's atmosphere, leaving the sovereignty warships behind. But Elise knew this wasn't over. She stood in the center of the ship, still holding the blade. The glow had dimmed, but the energy remained. Jonas sat across from her, watching carefully. The sovereignty won't stop hunting us now. That blade is the key to something bigger. Reyna crossed her arms. Then what do we do? Elise looked at the blade once more. The whispers had settled, but deep down, she knew one thing. The sovereignty was afraid of it. And that meant she had a weapon they couldn't control. She took a deep breath. We find out why this blade chose me. And then, her grip tightened. We bring the fight to them. The starfall drifted through the vast darkness of space. The crew had barely escaped the sovereignty warships, but Elise knew they wouldn't stay safe for long. The blade at her side hummed softly, its presence a constant reminder that everything had changed. She sat in the main hold, staring at the weapon. Why had it chosen her? Jonas, the archaeologist, paced in front of her, his mind racing. Elise, you don't understand how important this is. The Blade of Verath is not just a weapon. It's part of an ancient story, a war that was never finished. Elise tightened her grip. Then tell me. Jonas took a deep breath. Long ago, Queen Verath ruled one of the strongest empires in the galaxy. She was powerful, but she was betrayed. The sovereignty feared her, so they destroyed her people. They thought they had won, but before she died, she poured her strength into the blade, waiting for someone worthy to carry on her fight. Reyna scoffed. And now the blade has picked Elise. Jonas nodded. The blade stayed dormant for centuries. Many tried to claim it, but none were chosen. Until now. Elise frowned. She didn't feel like a chosen warrior, just a soldier trying to survive. Why me? Jonas hesitated. I don't know, but the sovereignty does. That's why they're coming for you. A sudden alarm blared through the ship. Orin, the tech specialist, shouted from the cockpit. We've got incoming. A sovereignty scout ship just dropped out of hyperspace. Elise jumped to her feet, weapons ready. Reyna rushed to the controls, while Elise strapped on her gear. The ship shook as enemy fire struck their shields. They're hailing us, Orin called. Elise took a deep breath. Put them through. A holographic image appeared. A sovereignty commander in dark armor. His eyes were cold, calculating. Elise Voss, he said smoothly, you have something that does not belong to you. Surrender the blade, and we will spare your crew. Elise's fingers brushed against the weapon at her hip. The whispers returned, stronger, angrier. She stood firm. Not happening. The commander sighed. Very well. The transmission cut out, and the enemy ship opened fire. The blade's power. The starfall shook violently. Sparks flew as the shield struggled to hold. We can't take much more of this, Orin shouted. Elise gritted her teeth. She had to do something. The blade had helped them before. Could it do it again? She unstrapped herself and ran toward the ship's power core. The metal walls trembled as another blast hit them. Elise, what are you doing? Jonas yelled. She didn't answer. She reached the power controls, heart pounding. Slowly, she unsheathed the Blade of Verath and placed it against the energy core. A shockwave of blue energy pulsed through the ship. The engines roared louder. The weapons hummed with new power. Reyna's voice crackled through the intercom. Whatever you did, do it again. Elise felt the blade vibrating in her hands. It was giving power, but was also taking something from her. Her vision blurred for a second. Was it her strength? Her mind? She gritted her teeth. Not today. She pushed forward, channeling the energy outward. The ship's weapons glowed brighter than ever before. Reyna took the shot. A single blast ripped through the enemy ship, destroying it in an instant. The silence that followed was deafening. Orin let out a breath. That shouldn't have been possible. Jonas stared at Elise. The blade, its power is growing. Elise exhaled, her body shaking. She sheathed the weapon and leaned against the wall. "And I don't think I can control it." The Queen's voice. Later, after repairing the ship, Elise sat alone in the hold. The blade rested across her lap. She could still hear the whispers, but now they were clearer. A voice, ancient and strong, echoed in her mind. "You are not ready." Elise stiffened. "Who are you?" The voice ignored her question. "The sovereignty fears you. But power alone is not enough. You must remember who I was." Elise frowned. "I don't want to remember. I just want to survive." The voice grew colder. "Then you will fail." Suddenly, a vision flooded her mind. She saw herself standing on a battlefield, but it wasn't her. It was Queen Verath. The Queen stood tall, the blade in her hand, facing an overwhelming army. The sovereignty's forces surrounded her, but she did not run. She fought. Elise felt the Queen's rage, her sorrow, her desperate need for justice. The vision faded, and Elise gasped, clutching her head. Jonas appeared beside her. "Elise, are you okay?" She looked up, her eyes burning with new determination. "I know where we need to go." Jonas frowned. "Where?" Elise took a deep breath. "Mournfall. The last place the Queen's people still exist." Jonas paled. "That planet is a graveyard. No one who goes there comes back." Elise stood, gripping the blade. "Then we'll be the first." The starfall dropped out of hyperspace, and the planet Mournfall came into view. A dark, lifeless world hanging in the void. Thick gray clouds swirled over its surface, hiding whatever secrets lay below. Elise stood at the cockpit window, the blade of Verath strapped to her back. The whispers in her head had grown stronger since they set course for this place. The voice of the ancient queen echoed in her mind, guiding her here. Mournfall was the final battlefield of Verath's people. If any answers remained, they were buried in the ruins below. Reyna, sitting at the pilot's seat, frowned. "This place gives me a bad feeling." Orin's fingers flew over the control panel, scanning the planet. Sensors are barely picking up anything. No cities, no settlements, just ruins. Jonas leaned forward. "If there are ruins, there might still be records. We need to land." Elise nodded. "Do it. But keep the ship ready for a fast exit." Reyna sighed and guided the starfall down. The ship trembled as they entered the thick atmosphere, pushing through storms of dust and lightning. When they finally broke through the clouds, the surface of Mournfall stretched beneath them, a wasteland of broken stone and shattered structures. The remains of an ancient civilization. Elise felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a battlefield. It was a tomb. The ruins speak. The ship touched down on a rocky plateau near a massive ruin, what seemed to be the remains of a temple. Elise, Jonas, Reyna, and Orin stepped out into the cold, stale air. The sky above was a swirling mix of dark clouds and flashes of lightning. "This place is dead," Orin muttered, shivering. Jonas stepped forward, brushing dust off an ancient stone. "Not dead, just waiting." Elise felt the same. The whispers in her head were no longer faint. They were loud, urging her forward. She led the way toward the temple. Massive stone doors lay cracked and broken, giving them an opening inside. They stepped into the darkness, flashlights cutting through the shadows. The walls were covered in carvings, images of warriors, battles, and a queen wielding a glowing blade, the same blade Elise now carried. Jonas traced the carvings with his fingers. "This tells the story of the final battle. Queen Verath and her people made their last stand here." Elise stepped closer. One carving showed the queen standing alone as her army fell. Another showed her sealing something away. "What did she lock away?" Elise asked. Jonas squinted at the symbols. "It says, 'The Queen's Fury.'" Before anyone could respond, the ground shook. A deep, inhuman growl echoed through the temple. Reyna raised her weapon. "What was that?" Orin checked his scanner. His face went pale. "We're not alone." The guardians of Mournfall. From the darkness, figures emerge. They were not human. Tall, armored beings with glowing blue eyes stepped forward. Their bodies were covered in ancient battle-scarred metal, their hands gripping massive weapons. They looked like statues brought to life. Jonas gasped. "There." One of the figures spoke in a deep, echoing voice. "You are not welcome here." Elise took a step forward, gripping the blade's hilt. "We're not enemies. We came for answers." The warrior's glowing eyes focused on the weapon at her side. "The blade has awakened." Elise nodded. "It chose me." The warriors exchanged glances. Then one of them pointed at Elise. "Then you must prove yourself." Before she could react, they attacked. Trial by combat. The first warrior lunged, swinging a massive energy axe. Elise barely dodged, rolling aside as the weapon slammed into the stone floor, leaving a deep crack. Reyna fired her rifle, but the shots bounced off their armor. "These things are tough." Orin cursed. "We need a new plan." Elise knew there was only one way to end this. The blade wanted her to fight. She drew the blade of Verath, and the air vibrated with power. The warriors paused for a brief moment, then attacked with renewed fury. Elise moved like lightning. She ducked under a sword swing, the blade guiding her movements. She struck back, her weapon slicing through the enemy's armor like it was nothing. The warrior staggered, falling to one knee. The others surrounded her, but she wasn't afraid. She wasn't just Elise anymore. For the first time, she felt the Queen's presence inside her. The whispers were no longer just voices. They were memories, skills, instincts. She became the warrior the blade wanted her to be. With precise, fluid strikes, she took down another guardian. The last one hesitated, then lowered his weapon. "You have proven yourself." The air grew still. The battle was over. The warrior stepped back and motioned toward the deeper part of the temple. "Go forward, blade bearer. The truth awaits." The forgotten truth. Elise took a deep breath and stepped into the next chamber. At its center was an ancient throne, covered in dust. And sitting on that throne was a figure. Not alive, but not fully dead. A preserved body, armored in the same dark metal as the guardians. Jonas's voice was barely a whisper. "Queen Verath." The Lysa's heart pounded. The queen's body sat unmoving, but her presence filled the room. The whispers in Elise's mind grew into words. "You are the last hope. The sovereignty must fall." Elise clenched her fists. The truth was clear now. The sovereignty had destroyed the queen's empire to keep its secrets buried. But the blade had chosen a new warrior, and Elise would finish what Queen Verath started. The cold silence of Mournfall's temple wrapped around Elise like a heavy cloak. The whispers in her mind had grown stronger, no longer faint echoes, but clear words guiding her every step. "The sovereignty must fall. The blade has chosen you." Elise stood before the ancient throne where Queen Verath's body sat, lifeless, yet still radiating power. Dust covered the queen's armor, but her presence filled the chamber like a storm waiting to break. Jonas stood behind Elise, his voice hushed. "The queen's people believed she would rise again, but instead, the blade found you." The Lysa's hand rested on the hilt of the blade of Verath. It felt heavier now, as if the weight of an entire forgotten empire rested in her grip. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "No warrior ever does." The queen's voice echoed in her mind, cold and ancient. Yet the blade always finds the one who will fight. The Lysa's heart pounded. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a queen. She was just a soldier trying to survive. But the galaxy didn't care what she wanted. The sovereignty was hunting her. Earth was under blockade. Humanity's freedom hung by a thread. If she ran now, no one would stop them. Slowly, Elise turned to her team. Reyna kept watch at the entrance, her rifle ready. Orin clutched his scanner tightly, his hand shaking. Jonas stood frozen, staring at the queen's throne. "We have to go," Elise said, her voice steady. The sovereignty will track us here. Jonas tore his gaze away from the throne. Go where? Elise gripped the blade tighter. To fight. The rising storm. They returned to the starfall, under the shadow of storm-filled skies. Lightning flickered across the horizon, casting eerie blue light over the ruins. Elise sat in the cockpit, staring at the endless stars above. The blade rested beside her, its black metal glowing faintly. The whispers were louder now, demanding vengeance. Orin's voice broke the silence. I've intercepted sovereignty transmissions. They've declared humanity a threat to galactic order. They're blockading Earth. No ships in or out. Reyna's fists clenched. They're trying to starve us into surrender. Jonas looked at Elise. They're afraid of the blade. They know what it means. Elise's gaze never left the stars. They should be afraid. We're not going to let them destroy humanity, she said quietly. We'll break their blockade, and we'll show them what happens when they push us too far. Reyna smirked. That's more like it. Orin swallowed hard. There's just one problem. Their fleet is massive. We're one ship. We'll never make it through. Elise's fingers brushed the blade's hilt. The Queen's whispers echoed in her mind. Call them. The forgotten. The outcasts. The broken. Her eyes narrowed. We won't be alone. Jonas frowned. What do you mean? Elise turned to her crew, her voice hard as steel. Every species the sovereignty crushed, every rebel they hunted, every smuggler they exiled. They're still out there, hiding, waiting. Reyna's eyes widened. You want to start a rebellion. Elisa's hand rested on the blade. It pulsed beneath her fingers. I want to finish one. The message of rebellion. They traveled to the fringes of the galaxy, where the sovereignty's grip was weakest. The starfall drifted into hidden asteroid fields and broken space stations, places where exiled soldiers and forgotten smugglers gathered. Elise sent out a single message across encrypted channels. To all who suffer under the sovereignty's rule, the blade has awakened. The time to rise is now. At first, there was only silence. Then the answers began to pour in. Old rebel cells, mercenary clans, smugglers, entire species the sovereignty had driven to the edge of extinction. They came in stolen ships and battered cruisers, a ragtag armada bound by nothing but hatred for the sovereignty. Elise stood at the Starfall's bridge, watching the scattered fleet gather in the blackness of space. Hundreds of ships, small, broken, but ready to fight. Jonas stared in disbelief. You actually did it. Elisa's grip tightened on the blade. The whispers in her mind were louder now, the Queen's fury flowing through her veins. This isn't my fight, she said softly. It's theirs. Breaking the blockade. The sovereignty's blockade surrounded Earth, a wall of massive warships bristling with weapons. No one had ever broken through their defenses. Until now. The ragtag fleet dropped out of hyperspace, engines burning bright. The sovereignty hailed them, demanding surrender. Elise stood at the Starfall's command deck, her heart pounding. The blade hummed at her side. She pressed the comms button. This is Captain Elise Voss of the human ship Starfall. A cold voice replied, filled with disdain. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched. Surrender the blade, and your world will be spared. Elisa's fingers wrapped around the hilt. The whispers surged in her mind. No more surrender. Her voice was steady. Come and take it. The battle erupted. The sovereignty's warships opened fire, but the rebel fleet fought like demons. Smugglers weaved through enemy lines. Exiled soldiers launched hit-and-run attacks. And at the heart of it all was Elise, leading the charge. The blade's power flowed through her, guiding her every move. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind with the Queen's fury. But Elise fought to stay in control. She wasn't just a vessel for vengeance. She was human. And she was fighting for something more. The price of power. The battle raged for hours. The blockade began to crumble, but the cost was high. Ships burned. Lives were lost. Elise stood at the Starfall's controls, her mind split between the fight and the whispers. The Queen's fury burned within her, but she refused to give in completely. The blade wanted vengeance, but Elise wanted freedom. As the last enemy warship fell, Elise collapsed to one knee, the blade still glowing in her grip. The whispers finally faded. The blockade was broken. Earth was free. But Elise knew the fight wasn't over. The sovereignty would come again, stronger, angrier. She sheathed the blade and looked out at the broken fleet. "Today we won," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, we start a revolution." The fires of battle still burned in the void of space. Wreckage from sovereignty warships floated like broken bones, the last remains of the blockade that once held Earth hostage. Elise stood on the Starfall's bridge, staring at the battlefield. The ragtag fleet she had gathered had done the impossible. They had won. But victory had a price. Ships had been lost. Thousands of fighters had given their lives, and Elise could feel it deep inside. The war was far from over. Jonas stepped beside her. "The blockade is broken. Earth is free." Elise's fingers brushed against the blade of Verath. It pulsed under her touch, the whispers of the ancient queen still present, still demanding more. "No," Elise said quietly. "Not yet." She turned to her crew. Orin was tending to his wounds. Reyna was reloading her weapons, preparing for the next fight. And Elise knew there would be another fight. The sovereignty strikes back. The sovereignty had ruled for centuries. They had crushed countless worlds, erased entire civilizations. And now, a human had shattered their control. The response was swift. Reports flooded in. Sovereignty warfleets were moving, not just to reclaim Earth, but to destroy it. Jonas clenched his fists. "They want to make an example of us." Orin's voice was tight with fear. "They're sending their entire armada." Reyna smirked. "Let them come. We'll send them back in pieces." Elise remained silent, gripping the blade. The whispers in her mind surged. The Queen's memories, her fury, her knowledge of war. And then, a single thought rose above the noise. "We cannot win this fight alone." A desperate gamble. Elise turned to her crew. "We need allies. More than just outcasts and smugglers. We need an army." Jonas frowned. "Who would fight with us? The sovereignty has crushed every rebellion before." Elise looked down at the blade, then back at her crew. "Not every rebellion." She tapped the console, bringing up a star map. The sovereignty destroyed Queen Verath's empire, but not all of her people died. Some survived. Orin's eyes widened. "You're talking about the lost legions." Jonas shook his head. "That's a myth. The Queen's armies were wiped out." Elise gripped the hilt of the blade. The whispers in her mind told her otherwise. They weren't wiped out. They were waiting. She pointed at a distant sector of space, a place no one dared enter. "The Veil Nebula. That's where they are." Reyna exhaled sharply. "You're telling me a hidden army of ancient warriors is just sitting out there, waiting for someone to find them?" Elise met her gaze. "Not someone. Me." The blade had chosen her. And now it was leading her to the last warriors of the Queen's fallen empire. The journey to the Veil. The Starfall jumped to hyperspace, leaving the battle-scarred remains of the blockade behind. As they traveled, Elise felt the whispers grow stronger. She was close. Jonas watched her carefully. "Are you sure about this?" Elise didn't hesitate. "Yes." Orin sighed. "I hope you're right, because if the legends are false, we're flying straight into an empty graveyard." But Elise knew. The lost legions were real, and they were waiting. The army awakens. The Starfall dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Veil Nebula. Before them was a sight no one had seen in centuries, a hidden world, shrouded in mist and lightning. And above it, a fleet. Dozens of ancient warships, their black hulls covered in the markings of Queen Verath's empire. They hung in silence, like ghosts frozen in time. Jonas whispered, "They're real." Reyna tightened her grip on her weapon. So why aren't they moving? Elise stepped forward. Because they're waiting for a command. She drew the blade of Verath. It glowed, filling the ship with a soft hum of power. The whispers in her mind turned into one clear voice. Give the order. Elise raised the blade. Her voice rang through the comms, across the silent fleet. The Queen is gone. The war was lost. But the fight is not over. The warships stirred. Lights flickered on. Engines roared to life. Elisa's heart pounded. It was working. She raised the blade higher. The sovereignty comes to finish what they started. But we will not bow. We will not run. We will show them what happens when they try to erase us. The fleet moved. Ancient warriors, long thought dead, answered her call. The lost legions of Verath had returned, and they were ready for war. The stars trembled as two great forces faced each other in the darkness of space. On one side, the Sovereignty Armada, a massive fleet of warships, their weapons glowing like fire ready to consume everything in their path. On the other, Elise's rebellion, a ragtag fleet of smugglers, exiled fighters, and the awakened lost legions of Verath. Their ships were old but fierce, their pilots ready to die for freedom. At the heart of it all stood Elise. She stood on the Starfall's bridge, gripping the blade of Verath. The whispers in her mind were silent now, as if waiting for her next move. Jonas stood beside her, staring at the enemy fleet. This is it. Elise exhaled. Yeah. Reyna smirked. One last fight, huh? Elise nodded. One last fight. The final battle had begun. The first strike. The sovereignty hailed them. A cold voice came through the comms. Surrender now. Lay down the blade, and we will grant mercy. Elisa's grip tightened. She pressed the comms button. No. The sovereignty's fleet opened fire. The battle exploded in an instant, lasers, missiles, and energy blasts tearing through the void. Ships dodged and weaved. Fighters clashed, and explosions lit up the battlefield like dying stars. The lost legions fought like warriors out of legend. Their ancient warships moved with deadly precision, their pilots striking with a skill honed over centuries of waiting. Jonas piloted the Starfall through the chaos, dodging enemy fire. We can't hold forever. Elise raised the blade. Its glow pulsed. The whispers roared in her mind. Lead them. Strike now. She pointed the blade toward the Sovereignty's command ship. That's our target. The final push. Oren's hands flew over the controls. That thing is a fortress. We can't break through its shields. Elise felt the power of the blade thrumming through her veins. We won't need to. She closed her eyes. And for a moment, she wasn't just Elise. She was Verath, a queen, a warrior, a force of nature. And she knew exactly what had to be done. She reached out with the blade's power. A pulse of energy rippled through space. The lost legions felt it. They answered. The ancient warships formed up, their weapons locking onto the command ship. The Sovereignty fleet faltered. Their sensors scrambled, their pilots confused. Reyna's eyes widened. What did you just do? Elise opened her eyes. I gave them a reason to fear us. The lost legions struck with all their might. The command ship's shields flickered. Jonas seized the moment. We've got an opening. Elise raised her blade. All ships, fire everything. The end of the Sovereignty. The entire fleet unleashed its firepower. Lasers, torpedoes, and energy blasts slammed into the enemy flagship. Its hull cracked, its weapons sputtered, and a chain of explosions erupted across its body. Inside, the Sovereignty's commanders panicked. They had never known fear, never tasted defeat. Until now. The command ship detonated, a massive explosion tearing through the sky. The rest of the Sovereignty fleet hesitated. Without their leaders, they were vulnerable. Elise pressed the comms. This is your last chance. Run, or fall. The Sovereignty ships turned and fled. The rebellion had won. A new dawn. Silence filled the Starfall's bridge. Oren collapsed in his chair, breathing heavily. Did we? Did we actually do it? Jonas laughed in disbelief. We did. Reyna grinned. I can't believe they ran. Elise looked down at the blade in her hands. Its glow was fading. The whispers were silent. It had served its purpose. She exhaled. It's over. Outside, the fleet of survivors gathered. The sovereignty was broken. The galaxy was free. And Elise Voss, the woman who never wanted to be a hero, had become a legend. She sheathed the blade of Verath. The Queen's fury had ended, but humanity's future had just begun.